Welcome to Newsmax TV. I'm Kathleen Walter. With us now is one of the rising stars of the British House of Commons, Mr. Jesse Norman. Mr. Norman just joined the policy board at 10 Downing Street and was given the prestigious Parliamentarian of the Year award in 2012. He's the author of several books and political works. His newest is called Edmund Burke, the First Conservative. And Jesse, thanks for joining us today.
Hello.
Well, it's been more than 200 years since the Irish statesman and political theorist Edmund Burke was alive, serving in the House of Commons. Why did you choose to write about him, and why does he matter today?
Well, I chose to write about him because, first of all, because he's an extraordinary man and a great hero who I think we Brits and you Americans should be enormously reveling in and enjoying again. I think he's right up there alongside Adam Smith as one of the founding fathers of our modern political economy. And the reason I wanted to write about him now in particular was because I think he's got an awful lot to say to politics in both countries and a lot to say to contemporary issues as well.
Modern day conservatism here in the States emphasizes limited government, a robust military, and strong social values. You describe Edmund Burke as the first conservative. Can we say he is then the father of modern day conservatism?
I think we can say he's the father of what we in Britain would call small c conservatism, and that's a slightly different thing from some of the neoconservatism or theocons or paleoconservatism that you see in America. Often those are driven by very, very strong ideological commitments, and Burke is not really an ideologist in that sense. He believes in moderate government and in the preservation of society and the social order and the institutions in it, but really in a very incremental and reform-minded way, not through some great scheme of radical innovation.
Looking at the political landscape here in the U.S. today, can you identify anyone here who is perhaps carrying his torch?
Well, I think in the amongst politicians, it's hard at this point, from my optic at least, to see any. I mean, you have some people in American political and commentary who I think are quite Burkean. Someone like a David Brooks at the New York Times, I think he's quite a Burkean in some respects.
Right now, the United States is at a crossroads in terms of its identity. President Obama continues moving the nation in the direction of a big government nanny state, while many Republicans are proving resistant to that. Americans are pretty divided about what kind of government that they want. What, if any, advice would Edmund Burke have for the Republican Party here in the States today?
Well, Edmund Burke was one of the founders of, in fact, arguably the founder of the idea of representative government as we know it, and the political party and party politics. And he saw that as the antidote to factionalism. And so I think his overwhelming message to all political parties in America, and particularly to the Republicans, would be to do not allow yourself to get split and fragmented into factions, but try to focus on the big issues that knit people together and not the smaller differences that divide them. And so I think that's the kind of message he'll be promoting. And if you think, in America, historically, the political parties were quite broad-based institutions, and he'd be looking to get back to that, while of course always preaching and promoting an idea of limited government and support for the family and the nation state.
Jesse, as you know, the U.S. and Great Britain both have a shared interest in the fight against terror. How would Edmund Burke handle this? Well,
I don't think he would have any specific recommendations. That's a very modern fight and a very technology-enabled fight. But the idea that terror is like a kind of germ or a disease is very familiar. And amongst other things, he's the first great theorist of revolution, because it was the French Revolution in his own time, after 1789, that provided a lot of the fears that people had in Britain about terror. And the worry was that terror would cross from France to Britain and would overturn the social order as it had done in Paris and in other French cities. And so I think he'd be very alert to warn of the danger of terror as an ideology, as it were, as a spreading germ of ideas which can do so much damage if it's allowed to get embedded in the body politic.
Should David Cameron and Barack Obama have anticipated the rise of radical regimes in the wake of the Arab Spring, particularly in Egypt, which the U.S. is aiding with tanks, fighter jets, and millions of dollars?
I think one of the things that Burke is very skeptical about is radical schemes of innovation in foreign policy as well. I think his view would be do these things if you regard them as absolutely essential to the well-being of your country and to its future development, but don't do them in pursuit of a wild dream of remaking a country which may have its own traditions and its own experience to draw on. And so I think he'd be quite skeptical about some of these bigger schemes. Of course, that really is more in the context of, for example, an Iraq war than it is in some of the smaller contexts that we're seeing at the moment.
Let's chat for a second about current affairs. Britain's economy has been weak. There's been no real recovery. Do you see any light at the end of the tunnel?
Well, we're starting to see the very first beginnings of the possibility that the British economy could be coming off the bottom. We knew in advance, people who'd read carefully into these different crises in the past knew that this would take something like between 6 and 10 years. And so since it started in 2008, 2014 is about the earliest that I've been expecting it to improve. But I think we are now potentially looking at a recovery over the next few years, yes.
What about the euro? Can it survive?
The euro has a very serious problem, which is that although a lot has been done to ease the monetary conditions in Europe, relatively little has been done to crack the fundamental problem, which is the lower levels of competitiveness of the southern tier of the Eurozone versus the north. And the effect of that is that the south is progressively racking up deficits which are being funded mainly by the Germans and the Dutch. And very little has been done to address that. And I think the effect of that is that the Germans are increasingly financially on the hook. How they deal with that after Mrs. Merkel gets re-elected, if she gets re-elected, is the really fundamental question.
Do you see Britain actually having a referendum in 2017 about remaining in the EU, and could Britain quit the EU?
I think the current government policy is the right one. That is to say, there should be a renegotiation about a different balance of powers in Europe, and then if that renegotiation if possible, that renegotiation should be put to a vote. Now, the point about that is that it does give the Eurozone and the European Union time to recover from the current crisis and time to come back to the table and have a sensible discussion about how things are going to change. What is interesting is not just that some of these things have had a very warm response behind the scenes in Germany, but that also in other countries there's a feeling that actually something has gone wrong here and that maybe some rethinking is required. And so I think there is real possibility, real scope for some form of renegotiation, and that could begin, oddly enough, from the very top of the European Union as well as from some of the more well-known countries around the periphery.
A new poll finds that most Americans want Congress to investigate the IRS and Benghazi scandals that have plagued the White House. How do you and your fellow parliamentarians view our president and his handling of these situations?
I think British parliamentarians have got a great deal of respect for the American political system at the moment. I think they would say, I certainly think Burke would say that, and he of course fought his life to oppose the abuse of power and arbitrary power. I think he would be very, very strong on the need for these kinds of scandals to be properly investigated and tracked down. And I think he would be supportive of a style of government that is limited but inclusive. And that would be the message he would want to send to American politicians across the political spectrum.
Now, most Americans don't have a feel for the Cameron government. Can you give us a sense of what the Prime Minister is doing right and wrong in governing Britain?
Yes, the Prime Minister is trying to hold together a coalition of two political parties that do not by any means see eye to eye on all those questions. And he's trying to do it in the face of the worst economic crisis that we have had in 100 years. So that's a matter of a difficult political task of keeping people around the table, but at the same time running a series of really quite radical policies designed to save money, to economize, but also to liberate people and give them more control over their lives. And we've seen this in benefit reform, we've seen this in schools, we've seen this in local government, and all of that's very, very welcome. And what he needs to be allowed to do is to complete the job that he started. And I think it'll be greatly to the benefit of the country if he's able to do that.
Last question for you, Jesse. For your work in the House of Commons, you yourself have been hailed as the future of the Conservative Party there. Can you share with us your vision?
Well, of course, a vision is a big thing to share in a small context, but I do think that there's every possibility that Britain can rediscover a lot of the qualities that have always made it great, and that means really thinking of ourselves as able to not just to lead thought in Europe, but also around the world, and to promote a process of investment in ourselves and re-education of ourselves, so that we can start to build a much higher value-added economy, an economy of higher wages, which benefits the least well-off, but also an economy built on innovation and industrial advantage. And I think America's done that very, very well over the last 10 or 15 years, and I would love us to emulate it and take that process even further if we could.
All right, again, the book is called Edmund Burke, The First Conservative. Jesse Norman, thanks for being with us today.
Thank you very much.
And thank you for watching Newsmax TV.